Thank you so much for agreeing to sit down and talk about this cancer series that you're doing. I just was hoping you would let me know, first of all, how are things going so far?
We're kind of in the middle of rollout. So this week we had one of Amy's letters coming out. Next week we're tag teaming on some stories about cancer survivors, cancer patients, current, and kind of like their path to treatment, right? We've been sort of we've been trying to like each week give kind of a different parameter that can kind of help explain why Iowa has such a large issue with cancer. This week we're kind of taking a step back, saying like let's talk about what who these folks are, what does cancer look like in the process, and I think what's been fun for me is with a project like this, you just have so many folks that are reaching out saying like, my mother died of cancer, or I'm going through infusion treatment right now. People are just really excited to talk about it. And so it's this next week's letter kind of grew out of that, this sense that there's just a lot of folks that I think that want to share their story, and we're going to try to hit a couple of those in the newsletter.
Yeah, this has been mostly like us talking about causes, like we've done pesticides. Zach did a really good one on pesticides. We've tackled water quality. This week, we were talking about research. And so we really wanted to, I think, get back to like the stories of actual people, actual Iowans that are going through this. And so I'm really excited about next week's piece.
My mother died of cancer when I was very young. I know you've had cancers in your family. I mean, has it been hard just personally covering this topic because of well, the baggage that we all carry?
Yeah, definitely. I lost my mother too. I'm sorry about that. Yeah. My mom died of lung cancer in 2017. That was a very difficult thing. Especially because you hear about lung cancer as one of those cancers that is people with a history of smoking get.
Hmm.
And that's not always true. And especially here in Iowa, because we have such high radon levels,
Hmm.
we're seeing a lot more lung cancer deaths. And those are really scary because if you don't have a history of smoking, you can't get screened. There's no test for you. You just kind of have to wait until you get those symptoms to get screened for something like that. Or have I've talked to people that have gotten screened for something else and then they found it. It's just sort of like we're really needing, I think, more looks at different cancers, more research into different cancers, better treatments for cancers, as well as looking at causes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is really hard, right? There was a particularly, like, I think it was like 3 weeks ago. I was talking to Amy about it. Like, we had like just, it was, I was talking to an oncologist this hour. 30 minutes later, we're talking to someone who just got diagnosed with cancer. Next, we're talking to someone who, lost someone to cancer. There was like this moment where we were kind of like in the waves of this thing, right?
Yeah.
You were hearing from researchers, you were hearing from patients, you were hearing. Um, but the thing that like I kind of strapped myself to during that process was just the amount of attention that there is in it, right? Like there's so much of my work that when I think about like the big stories that I've worked on, often I have to spend a little bit of time winding up like the stakes of it. Like why is this thing important to cover? Why should you care about an Episcopal church in this small town? Why should you
Mhm.
care about the use of this technology in our agricultural fields? With this story, we haven't had to explain stakes.
Right.
Readers understand the stakes. Readers understand that why this is such an acute issue for Iowans, and it's been really rewarding, I think, to have that kind of direct line of communication with readers for this story.
They really want to talk to us too. I
Hmm.
was at the listening session that the Harkin Institute and the Iowa Environmental Council put on in Waterloo this week. And they just mentioned off the top, like, there's some reporters here pointed us out. If you want to talk to them about your cancer thing, I'm used to pulling people aside. Us reporters are like, hey, can I talk to you? I didn't have to do that. I stood at the door and people were like, "Are you the reporter? Can I talk to you?" Like I was getting so many stories that way. So people are just, I think, desperate to get that information out there because they're frankly not being heard.
Is it hard to interview people about one of the worst experiences of their life? I mean, that's not something that we do every day in our work, unless
Yeah.
you're a crime and courts reporter,
Yeah,
which
that's
I'm
right.
not.
Sometimes you do. No, not for this. Most people have gone through it or have had their loved ones go through it, maybe years ago, or they've dealt with it and sort of come to terms with it. So I mean, they just want to be heard.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, what's oftentimes right, the hard story that you're trying to tell is one that you're trying to like convince. You're both doing this process of like trying to convince them that you are the right person to tell the story,
Mhm.
that they should tell it at all, and that you're going to do a good job by them. In this case, like we just have a lot of folks that are reaching out saying like, I want to tell my story, right? Like I want
Yeah.
this read into the record. I feel like people need to learn from this. And um, and I think that makes it as hard as they are sometimes to hear to sit with. There's one of the women that will appear in the series lost her daughter to cancer, and she's going through on this. She's like bringing her laptop around to show me like photos of her growing up and of
Mhm.
uh, as at her first marathon, right? These like kind of these like milestones that were really important for her to see her daughter in. And I think the challenge of any story like this is the catharsis is always contrived, right? Like we're creating material in the space because like we find these stories meaningful. Um, but despite it being contrived, I think there is like a genuine sense of like emotional release, right? There's a sense that what we're doing, what getting to tell your story in this space, can be an important part of healing, can be an important part of growing from this incident, putting in context, which has been really special.
And especially, I think the older folks are used to not talking about cancer.
Mm.
It used to
Mhm.
be a lot more shameful for them and probably because there weren't a lot of good treatments, and you would just sort of watch your relatives like die horribly in pain. And so that's probably changed a lot of people's perspectives too. This is no longer a shameful thing that they have personal responsibility for. I mean, this is happening to everyone.
Mhm. Do you feel, I was thinking back on during the first year of the pandemic and how, I mean, none of us really were public health reporters. We all had to overnight become public health reporters. And
Right.
I don't know about you, but I just felt tremendous pressure to get those stories right. Like not that I'm not always trying to get a story right, but if I get something wrong in previewing a legislative election or something, it's like the stakes are lower. But if I get this story wrong, like people could die if I'm giving them misleading information. So do you feel any extra pressure in reporting on something as weighty as cancer in Iowa?
I'll give you an example. I'm really proud of the piece I put together on the science around pesticides and its connection to cancer, right? Um, I got a call from Carrie Gillum, who kind of wrote the book. Letter comes out, goes to press. I get a ton of really good glowing feedback. But I get a call from Carrie Gillum, who's she wrote the book on the Monsanto trial, Johnson v. Monsanto.
Mhm. Mhm.
She wrote the book on kind of the like struggle to get pesticides regulated in the United States. Like really just like she wrote for Reuters for years to covering
Mhm.
exactly this topic. Just a great someone that you come across in the space. And she emailed me out of the blue and said like, "Hey, I noticed that you said that this international body of cancer researchers changed their classification for how they think about this one chemical as carcinogenic. But they didn't change it. That was a brand new. That was they characterized it for the very first time."
Mm.
And I remember like my initial thought was like, that is you that is an angel on the tip of a pin. That how can this matter? But it is important, right? Like these
Mhm.
are really when you, particularly I think one of the challenges for something like this is like we are not experts, right? We don't study cancer. We're not oncologists. We're not researchers. That is not our background, right? We talk to folks. We read what we can. We try to do our best. But we make mistakes, right? And how do you approach that? You act quickly. You right the ship, right?
Mhm.
And it's a bummer to eat crow in public, but particularly when you're doing work on a topic that's important, you have to
Mhm.
really dive in,
Stay humble.
stay
Yeah.
home, eat crow. Eat crow early, eat crow often. You know.
Well, if that's the biggest mistake that she pointed out, that I think you're doing pretty well there with your reporting. What's the most surprising thing that you've learned so far? And I know that you're still in the process of reporting some of these stories.
Do you want to go, Amy, or you let me to go?
Oh man, there was a cool story that I ran into. So I talked to a couple women who lost their husbands to glioblastoma, which is a type of brain cancer that has a very, very low survival rate. And one of them's a nurse and sort of knew the stakes immediately when her husband was diagnosed. And he's an engineer and worked with researchers at the University of Iowa to create like this device that he could basically use at night, and it ended up shrinking his tumors down and giving him like basically an extra year and a half. He ended up living 2.5 years after diagnosis, which I guess the standard is a year, basically. So that's really interesting. And so his wife and her friend who also lost her husband are sort of taking this further. They're trying to work with the University of Iowa researchers to keep this going, to make new prototypes, to get these treatments out. You often think about research being sort of the realm of scientists, or other people that aren't really involved, not necessarily the families themselves that are pushing this. So that was really interesting to find out.
There, there's a lot there are a lot of new things to that I learned. One, we talk a lot about. I think it's pretty common. I bet if you polled people, like they would think that in the last 3 decades that we've seen some amazing improvements in our treatment for many kinds of cancer, and to some extent that is absolutely true, right? Survivor numbers tell a story of tell a very positive story about how treatments have evolved over time.
Mhm.
One researcher I spoke with, one oncologist I spoke with, said that there is this problem when we use survivorship data, though. We do so many more screenings than we used to for
Hmm.
cancer,
Hmm.
right? Yearly mammograms for, I think it's women over 40. It's we just there's this process. We've adapted a much more intense, much more rigorous screening process, and that means that we are catching so many more cancers. Period. Those are lethal and non-lethal cancers, right?
Hmm.
And so this oncologist was explaining to me that, like, okay, so like, yeah, we're definitely catching many more cancers, but are we also catching non-lethal cancers, right? And so there's this like
Hmm.
simultaneous thing that we have to be doing where it's not just that we're catching. It's not simply good enough to catch many more cancers. Period. Right? We must have better treatment for what would be lethal cancers. Right? And I just just given that I had like kind of intuited that research that the story of cancer treatment was this uniformly uphill arc towards better outcomes. It was interesting. It was challenging to hear that, right? I've also another thing that's super interesting is I think in general the like science, while it is true that glyphosate does not cause cancer, that does not mean that there is not a causal link to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, for
Hmm.
example, right?
Hmm.
And while and what Dave, for me, I think the really interesting thing that comes out of this is the relationship between where the research is and where our policy making is, where our conversations around what ought to be our policies are, right? Um, I think I think the data exists, the science exists to raise some real questions about the extent to which we should be spraying glyphosate near schools,
Hmm.
right? I think that there's a really good question to be asked there, whether we should be spraying it so close to open waters, right? But the idea that we're as a state not even asking those questions, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a
Hmm.
really challenging feature. Chris Jones, the Mensch, talks about how we are, rather than government, that we are incentivizing the production of additionally high yield, additionally like larger scope corn production, soybean production, but we're not. Um, and then the government is also subsidizing it by installing stuff like osmosis fixtures at water plants to begin filtering out some of the largesse that we kind of help subsidize in the fields, right? The government is like kind of paying twice to subsidize this behavior that
Hmm.
is in service of what, of whom? And I think that's an interesting piece here that's in tension, and I think readers are thinking a lot about it. I know it's something that I'm thinking a lot about.
I've
Yeah,
had,
the
oh,
policy is very interesting. I just wanted to agree on that because it seems like it's just a piece of healthcare. It's just a piece of what can we do about this? Where do we need to focus? But when you dig down, it's absolutely policy. It's absolutely, are we funding this enough? We're seeing funding being slashed. What is that doing to drugs in the pipeline, to clinical trials in the pipeline?
mhm.
And so policy is a big part of this.
Yeah, well, I mean, mRNA vaccines are like the most promising cancer treatments, and now
Yeah,
we're ending contracts to develop more of them. So
right.
I thought your interview with David Swartney, I mean, he brought up so many interesting things about the science and the statistics. One of my brothers is a statistician, so we've talked about this quite a lot. It's really difficult to prove the link between chemicals and any kind of health condition. And you may know this already, but R.A. Fisher, who was like the giant of statistics of the 20th century, he spent years testifying that smoking did not cause lung cancer. He was
Mhm.
an expert witness in trials on behalf of tobacco companies
Right.
because it's actually very difficult to prove, even something as clear as that, because you can always say there are confounding factors and maybe something drives certain people to be more likely to smoke and more likely to get lung cancer. So then when you look at these things, I mean, how do you write about this when it's rare, as David said, unless somebody has some massive occupational exposure, it's rare that you can say this person's cancer was caused by exposure to nitrates or pesticides or whatever it is.
I think it's really important. We were talking about like being humble, right? Talking about what you actually, talking about what's real, talking about when there's a lapse, right? Talking about when there's a hole in the data, right? I think it's really important that we be honest with readers about what a study says, and importantly, like what it doesn't say,
Yeah.
right? I think there is a habit, particularly in the sort of clean water advocacy spaces, clean air advocacy spaces, to take a study and run with it, right? And I get it, right? Like when you learn that the extent to which glyphosate is associated with an increased risk of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, right? I think that it is it is understandable to want to run with that causal link as a cause, right? As like this, because of glyphosate exposure here, we got here. But the reality of Iowa's exposure, just talking about pesticides here, the reality of Iowa's exposure problem is we are talking about atmospheric exposure, like low
Mhm.
level exposure to many, 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 many pesticides over such a long time, right?
Mhm.
This is not, and if you follow like OSHA injury reports, right? Like this is not like a bucket of chemicals got dumped on someone in one incident, right? We're talking about this kind of like low level thing over time, right? And so I think we have to, I do think it's important to be humble about what the data actually says and what conclusions we can draw from it. I think it's why we spent so much time talking to oncologists and talking to people that study environmental contamination, because we don't know, right? We're not researchers in this space. We have to talk about like what our weaknesses are here. At the same time, I don't think that means we don't act, right? I don't think that
Mhm.
means we don't know enough to know that spraying around schools, like maybe that practice shouldn't continue,
Mhm.
right? Spraying around open bodies of water, maybe that shouldn't continue. Maybe we should be thinking more about how much fungicide is getting sprayed in our fields by crop dusters, right? Maybe we should be thinking about um, the extent to the hurdles, the regulatory hurdles that insurance companies require patients to go through in order to get
Mm.
in order to get the treatment they need, right? Like there are issues that this series kind of bears witness to, um, that I don't think we need to wait, right? I don't think we need to wait for some causal study to come down the line. Maybe that study will come. It came with smoking, right?
Mhm.
And we got that policy change in a big way. Um, but like I love that you brought up the David Sorney interview, but because
Mhm.
that was my takeaway from his, just because just because we do not have, you know, with a 100%, just because we cannot say that this is 100% responsible for that, does not mean that we shouldn't think about the relationships between the two.
Mhm.
And we should be asking, why don't we have those relationships? Why don't we have those studies? Why didn't we have those studies in the 60s, for example, around smoking and lung cancer? And it's because they were squelched by the industry, right?
Mhm.
Why don't we have a study about glyphosate except for that one from the 1980s, right?
Mhm.
We can ask those questions at the same time as we're saying we don't know. Here's why we don't know, right? Here's why maybe we don't have these studies. And there's a lot of incentive for these multinational companies to not want to look into the chemicals too closely. And I think that's also important to point out.
I thought it was interesting. Dr. Mary Charlton told you, Zach, that she mentioned smoking and tobacco use. So this is something we have a lot of data on. And we have made policy changes. We banned indoor smoking for the most part, except for casinos.
And
Um,
some Waffle Houses.
Thank you for the gambling industry lobbyists on that. But are you planning to look into what's going on with tobacco use prevention in Iowa? Since as it sounded to me like she was saying we could be doing more. We could still be lowering cancer more from smoking, and it seems like that's getting less attention because it's kind of old news compared to the other environmental causes of cancer.
Yeah, I mean, we have seen a uptick in certainly in tobacco product use over the last couple of years, last decade, due mostly to smokeless products, your Zens, your snus coming on the market and becoming so popular. Currently, we're still working out. I mean, this is an ongoing series that we're kind of working our way through as we have enough to go on.
Hmm.
There are a lot of topics that we hope to get to, but particularly when you think about how so Iowa has the second highest rate of cancer. The highest rate of cancer is Kentucky, right?
Hmm.
And that is, if you look at their kind of like what are the cancers that Kentucky is so high ahead, so far ahead on, it is lung cancer, right? It is kind of associated with it just a higher rate of smoking, more libertine relationship with smoking. Um, yeah, so I think it is an important, I think it's an important piece and would be a great letter. I hope in this series we can get to it.
Uh, Dr. Charlton also mentioned the negative feedback they got last year when they highlighted the alcohol and the binge drinking. And maybe I was
Mm.
one of those people who was like,
Yeah.
oh, come on, they're trying to make it into a personal responsibility issue.
Yeah.
But it is true, as she said, there are a lot of people who still have no idea that even moderate drinking is associated with a higher risk of several kinds of cancers. And why do you think that is so much less widely known than, I mean, I think a lot of people might intuit that pesticides might give people cancer, but why isn't the link to alcohol better known?
Coming up in the series, we have a conversation with Dr. Richard Deming, famous oncologist. He's a celebrity oncologist in the state of Iowa, big name. Deming, one of the things that Deming gave me, which I think of as I think I'm going to devote a whole letter to it, is exactly this, right? Like he says, we know that we can prevent something like 40% of all cancer diagnosis with a certain couple of changes to behavior, right? These are things like smoking, stopping people who are currently smoking, stopping or preventing people from smoking in the first place. Same thing with drinking. Alcohol is 100% part of the story of our cancer numbers. I think the challenge, I think like just to bracket out the like kind of meta conversation, right? I think there is a want for individual explanations of things, right? Because if it's an individual explanation, then we have agency and we can do something about it. And there's like kind of there's like good, wholesome narrative about it. I just have to exercise more, and that can lower my chances of getting certain kinds of cancer, right? I can stop drinking, that can lower my chances of cancer, and that's all true, right? But if that's the only thing we're focusing on, and we're not thinking about the impact that that pesticides have on our cancer rate, that nitrates in our drinking water have on our cancer rate, the relationship between then we're only thinking about certain choices and not other choices, right? We're thinking about personal choices of us as individuals, and we're not thinking about the choices that large corporations make on our behalf, that our government
Mhm.
makes on our behalf.
Mhm.
And so like in some ways, right, I think it's really important. I think we have huge brains. We are so smart. The great thing about being human is you could hold two correct ideas that are at odds with one another in your head at once and like understand the truth of them both. It is both true that there are individual explanations that could limit your cancer, the likelihood of you getting cancer. That is true. It is also true that that is not everything and that is not sufficient.
Yeah, and especially because if you look at the rates, our rates are so much higher, and we don't drink more than Wisconsin, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so there is obviously something else going on.
Right.
Everyone wants to bag on Wisconsin. Poor
They
Wisconsin.
drink the most. It's facts.
I'm going to just throw out there my pet theory that I think the mainstream media are very reliant on advertising revenue from alcohol companies and
Mm.
restaurants and bars. I think there has been over many, many years just not enough coverage of the link between alcohol and cancer. But that's my
Yep.
little hobby horse. What's your favorite thing to this? What angle has been your favorite to research so far in this series?
Amy, you want to go first?
Mm. I mean, we're just water quality was so detailed. I loved diving into like all the things about it. And there's, the article is just like a fraction of what we know. Of course, it
Mhm.
always is, right, when you're reporting. But it was so much of a fraction of what I learned about just the water quality that we have, not only recreationally, but drinking water. How nitrates come about, what causes them, what else they can do to your body. Just learning so much that I didn't know, about our lakes, our rivers, how that affects us. I mean, I got a reverse osmosis system after,
Mhm.
learning about all this thing. Like, I don't mean to scare people, but like it definitely made me question, like, okay, am I doing enough? Like to Zach's point, am I doing enough personally to protect myself from a cancer risk? So I
Mhm.
made the kind of expensive decision, to get one of those little countertop
Yep.
reverse osmosis filters, just to try to lower my cancer rate because there was so much that I learned, that was so fascinating.
Um, like obviously the uh, glyphosate letter was an exciting one for me just because it's something that we hear a lot about. If you covered the Ag Gag
Mhm.
Act, right? Like that was we just heard so much about it, and like so many of those conversations I spent like not really knowing the science undergirding some of this. And so it was really, I think, rewarding to like finally dive into it. But like for me and mine, like the thing that I'm excited about hasn't been written yet, and it's the end of this series.
Mhm.
There was a Tony Lays of Kaiser Family Foundation, Family Found
I think they now just call themselves KFF News.
KFF News. I grabbed a beer with him ahead of this series dropping because I wanted to pick someone's brain who's done like big series like this, who's thought me done like kind of big theoretical work around like
Mhm.
how do you build out a series like this. Um, and he said, with health reporting, like the most important thing, this isn't a direct quote, but like, hear me out. The greatest thing you can do as a health reporter is to tell someone what they can do about it, right?
Mhm.
You can spend all your time reporting the tragedy. You can spend all your time, doing the kind of atrocity porn of just like how bad things are. But the really powerful thing, the thing that readers, I think, that he says, that he has found readers are hungry for is, what can they do about this thing? How can they change the future with this attention that they're putting into the story? And so there are some personal and structural kind of pieces that we want to explore in the ending that are going to kind of try to speak to that sense of like what can we do? What are the policy vehicles? What are the behavioral vehicles that we can use to better to address this crisis in Iowa health? So I'm excited about that.
It was interesting. Dr. Charlton brought up those radon bills. There were several bills in the Iowa House. I think one of them actually got through the Iowa House. It didn't go anywhere in the Iowa Senate.
Nope.
And yet we know that Iowa is one of the highest states for radon. We know radon causes a lot of lung cancers. And yet does it ever just make you feel hopeless that we can't even this very small piece of the cancer puzzle we can't manage to address?
Oh yeah. I mean, losing my mom to probable radon cancer makes me furious. Like, why didn't we? And I talked to a woman who started this White Ribbon Project. She lives out in Colorado. She was diagnosed with lung cancer, went in for a different sort of scan and found it. So she's able to still be living on it, but she thinks she didn't even consider radon, and she thinks that a lot of people aren't considering radon. It's not being talked about in doctors'
Mhm.
offices, and it's not necessarily being talked about at the legislative level, or there's not a lot being passed. But there are things that we can do. To Zach's point, like I think that'll be one of the big pieces is like not only can you go get your radon tested, you can go some libraries. A lot of them have kits that you can borrow, or you can, go get this tested yourself from a company. There are ways that we can do this, but absolutely, I think that there are people being left behind. There are people in rental houses that could benefit from like a law that requires landlords to test for radon, every so often. There are definitely like blind spots that we have in terms of like how much radon is too much, and then research is still trying to suss that out. So
Mhm.
definitely stuff like that would be things that we can try. And Colorado actually did pass a law that was related to I believe rental units and landlords. So that could be replicated in Iowa if we want to.
If your grass is too high and your property is considered a nuisance, cities will withhold your rental permit. We
Mhm.
will not do that for something that could that has been shown to cause cancer over
Hmm.
long exposures.
Mhm.
That's remarkable.
It is. Where can people find the rest of this series or catch up on what you've already published?
So we're dropping it in the newsletter first on Tuesdays. So you can subscribe for free at iowastartingline.com/newsletter. And we're also putting it on the website and under the hotspot investigating cancer in Iowa. So you can find all those stories on that page.
And we've got great art, so like check it out. I'm really proud of not just like what's in this series, but like how it looks. The design team like put together these like incredible graphics that I'm really proud of. Also check Cornhole Champions, our podcast, where I got some conversations that we're peeling out from this series. There's a lot of ways to engage with the work, and I hope folks will.
The podcast comes out Wednesdays. Yep. And we've been talking about the cancer series every week.
Mhm.
Is there anything I didn't ask that you think is important for my readers to know?
We're still looking for stories. I mean, if you want to share your story, please do. And we're also looking for any other feedback. Like Zachary said, we're humble, aren't we?
I'm not humble. I didn't say that, but we should be humble. So write in, Amy, you want to give write into our emails, Zach at iowastartingline.com.
Yeah, you can send also just to info@iowastartingline.com as well.
All right. Well, so thanks so much for sitting down with me.
Thanks for letting us join, Laura.
Thanks, Laura.